Good afternoon. Welcome to Composition and Motif in Romare Bearden's Collages from 1964 to 1969. I'm Kamara Holloway, the project manager for the Romare Bearden Catalogue Raisonné at the Wildenstein-Plattner Institute. We are pleased to present this webinar featuring our guest speaker, Dr. Jacqueline Francis, in conjunction with the launch of the Romare Bearden Catalogue Raisonné project, which is now accessible on the WPI's website, wpi.art. We're excited to share this inaugural installment of the Catalogue Raisonné, which highlights Bearden's output between 1964 and 1969. This crucial phase in his career was the moment when Bearden became known for his innovations in collage and returned to Black figuration. Today, we will learn more about this work and its subject matter from our speaker. A housekeeping note before I introduce Dr. Francis. There will be an opportunity to ask her questions following the presentation. We ask that you please type your questions using the Q&A option, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. Okay, so Jacqueline Francis is an art historian, curator, and writer. As a Bearden expert, she has authored several essays, including Reading Bearden, published in the National Gallery of Art's exhibition catalog of the 2003 retrospective, The Art of Romare Bearden, Bearden's Hands in the anthology Romare Bearden, American Modernist of 2011, for which she also served as the co-editor with Ruth Fine, and Romare Bearden's Mauritius, Wars, Nations, and Everything Else in the journal Panorama in 2018. To accompany the Catalogue Raisonné project, Dr. Francis has co-authored an essay with Dr. Anne Monahan that contextualized Bearden's career evolution between 1964 and 1969. More broadly speaking, Dr. Francis researches and writes modern and contemporary U.S. art histories. She has a special interest in the construction of the past and present racialized identities and identifications, which she considers in the critical framework of social art history. She is the author of Making Race, Modernism and Racial Art in America, 2012. It's the first book-length study of interwar expressionist American painting, scrutinized through the lens of critical race art history. Dr. Francis has edited and co-edited several books dedicated to the works and influence of historical and present-day artists, including Is Now the Time for Joyous Rage, a 2023 collection of writings inspired by the work of conceptual artist Lorraine O'Grady, and Sergeant Claude Johnson, a catalog accompanying the Huntington Art Museum's exhibition of this 20th century modernist understudied work. Dr. Francis is Dean of the Humanities and Sciences at the California College of the Arts, which is located on the traditional and unceded lands of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, also known as San Francisco. And she actively contributes to our scholarly community. She has served on the boards of research projects, scholarly publications, and advocacy membership organizations in the field of art history and visual culture studies, including the Living New Deal Initiative, Third Text, Critical Perspectives on Contemporary Art and Culture, the College Art Association, and the U.S. Latinx Art Forum. She is on the executive council of the National Committee for the History of Art, which is the U.S. delegation to the Comité International d'Histoire de l'Art. I've had the pleasure and privilege of knowing Dr. Francis for a long time now, as together we are the co-founders of the Association for Critical Race Art History. So I'm especially delighted that we're able to hear her recent reflection on Bearden's art and career as we celebrate the launch of the Catalogue Raisonné. And so now I'm going to turn over the floor to Dr. Francis. Jackie?
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen with everyone. Great. Of course, I must start off with a sincere thank you to WPI for inviting me to give this talk today. Thank you, Kamara, for that generous introduction, which almost brings me to tears. Everyone here at WPI has played a generative role in this research, providing access to works of art, reproductions of them, archival material, and secondary sources. I congratulate the WPI team working with the Romare Bearden Foundation for the inaugural release of the Bearden Catalogue Raisonné. Their scholarly and curatorial expertise is evident on the website. Today, I'll speak for about 40 minutes. My presentation, I hope, is a listener-friendly version of the essay authored by Anne Monahan and me, commissioned by WPI and available on its website. It was great to work with Anne. She is an admired scholar of 20th century US modernism. She is an author of monographic studies such as Horace Pippin, American Modern, and influential essays that demonstrate her peerless research and close reading of objects, as the one she did on Faith Ringgold's 1967 painting called Die. Please look for her publications and know that the presentation I'm delivering today comes from our collaboration that is evident in the article. In the early 1960s, Romare Bearden was known as an abstract artist with a history of showing figurative oil paintings and watercolor drawings in solo exhibitions at New York City's Coos Gallery and later in Barone Gallery. He also participated in group exhibitions of 20th century modernism. Yet by 1968, Bearden was known for more than abstract painting. That year, Time magazine hailed his work, praising it as, quote, a jigsaw combination of photo montage and paste-up collage that has become his personal style. They offered him this commission for a cover image. In the same year of 1968, Bearden did another cover for Time's sister publication, Fortune. That commission was followed by a third in 1969. It was for the New York Times Magazine, and Bearden's collage Soul History was the cover image. In the 1960s, Bearden became known as a figurative collage artist. Indeed, the curator Henri Ghent, who worked with Bearden, noted in 1969, quote, in addition to being an artist of superior gifts, Mr. Bearden enjoys the respect and admiration of colleagues, both Black and white alike. And I'll say here too, among the scholarly publications that Anne and I cite in our article, which again is up on the WPI website, is Emily Hage's 2016 essay, Reconfiguring Race, Recontextualizing the Media, Romare Bearden's 1968 Fortune and Time covers. So throughout today's talk, I'd like to hail up the sources that have informed my work and certainly inform Anne in my article that is on the WPI site. This period of enormous import and transition in Bearden's career is the focus of the inaugural installment of the Catalogue Raisonné. Manipulating both hand-pieced paperworks and enlarged photocopied versions of them, Bearden interpreted a wide range of subjects that had intrigued him in his earlier in his career. Ancient and modernist literature, motifs of Western art history, such as the Madonna and the female nude, and enigmatic genre scenes. He presented everyday Black people as iconic and heroic types: teachers, preachers, musicians, laborers, healers, and card players. West African ritual sculpture, a body of work that Bearden studied in exhibitions and researched since the 1930s, was a new compositional element in the 1960s collages. He cut out pictures of busts and masks and made pasted elements that he would put on top of human bodies. He juxtaposed them next to classical Western architectural elements. He floated them above contemporaneous urban and seemingly timeless rural settings. This decontextualizing tactic lent enchantment, energy, and majesty to these amalgamated pictures that are about, and I use the word about in quotes, the connections between Black people across the African diaspora and the prodigious impact of African American culture as a historical phenomenon with reverberations through every aspect of American life. These are subjects, of course, that were picked up by curators of Bearden's work in exhibitions mounted after his death. Among them, they include Sharon Patton, Valerie Mercer, Ruth Fine, Gerald Melberg, Gail Gabird, Thelma Golden, and Tracy Fitzgerald. Please search out their informative and beautifully organized exhibition catalogs in the bibliography for the article as well as on the WPI site. Fred Romare Harry Bearden was born in Charlotte, North Carolina in 1911. In the precarious environment of the Jim Crow South, Bearden's very close forebears sustained themselves as farm laborers, merchants, and property owners. Participants in the Great Migration of Black Southerners who sought greater freedoms and better opportunities elsewhere, Bearden's college-educated parents departed the South a few years after his birth. Ultimately, Bearden's civil servant father and journalist activist mother settled in Harlem in 1920, joining an ever-striving social class of Black activists, creatives, politicians, and professionals. Bearden came of age in New York City's dynamically modern milieu. And so for more on Bearden's life, please check out Mary Schmidt Campbell's monograph, An American Odyssey, The Life and Work of Romare Bearden, published in 2018. Early on, Bearden struck out to make a career in art, making it and writing about it. In 1935, he earned a bachelor's degree in general education from New York University, where he was a cartoonist for the student paper. Afterward, he studied at the Art Students League, sold cartoons to Black and general interest magazines, and he was a New York City social worker. You can read too about Bearden's cartoons from Michael Lobel's article, which you can find online as well. Bearden would work as a social worker throughout the rest of his life, finally retiring in the late 1960s. But back to the 30s. He joined the Harlem Artists Guild, whose members sought to establish studio and exhibition space for Black artists in the neighborhood and to increase Black employment on the Federal Art Project throughout the nation. And the Federal Art Project was, of course, this Great Depression project that was part of the WPA and the New Deal. Bearden's early paintings, social realist landscapes, and expressionist genre portraits in oil, gouache, and watercolor were first exhibited in the Harlem Artists Guild space called 306. It was named for the number of its West 141st Street building. In 1940 was the first time that Bearden exhibited with 306 artists. Subsequently, white gallerists Caress Crosby in Washington, D.C., and Edith Halpert in New York included Bearden's work in Negro art surveys. In 1945, the New York gallerist Samuel Coutts, a champion of figuratively abstract art, started representing Bearden and mounted 3 solo shows of the artist's paintings in his West 57th Street gallery. The Museum of Modern Art purchased Bearden's watercolor, He Is Arisen, a geometric and expressionist interpretation of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. In the 1940s, Bearden was known in Black artist circles and outside of them. Here I'm showing you a cartoon by the New York artist Ad Reinhardt, a contemporary of Bearden and one he knew. In Reinhardt's lighthearted image, modern 20th century American art made by people in the United States from a variety of ethno-racial and cultural backgrounds, and in Reinhardt's drawing, mostly men, what he shows us is that modern American art circa 1946 was born from roots in the ancient world on the African, Asian, and European continents. I could talk a lot about this, this cartoon, and I have in other publications. For now, I just want to show you that Reinhardt included Bearden in the 20th century, mid-20th century American modernist group, the people who were working in figuratively abstract painting. So on the right, you see the detail of that middle part of the tree where the birds are in the crook of the tree's branches. So in the pivotal decades spanning the Great Depression and World War II, and then later the Korean War, Bearden wrote critical essays about the challenge of making art that was relevant to contemporary audiences. In essays such as The Negro Artist and Modern Art, published in 1934, and The Negro Artist Dilemma, published in 1946, Bearden interrogates the period notions that the best African American artist production was merely documentation of racial struggle and racist oppression, made to communicate Black people's protest and solicit pity from others. The charge Bearden scripted for himself and for all modernists, Black and non-Black, was to make art informed by personal experiences and engagement with familiar subjects, and to interpret them formally and not illustratively. In an artist statement of the 1940s, Bearden wrote, "I am trying to find out what there is in me that is common to or touches other men," end of quote. In Bearden's mind, the most successful modernist art appealed to audiences who recognized the universal in the political. Bearden spent the 1950s seeking ways to realize this ideal, dropped when Samuel Coates reorganized his gallery's roster in 1949. Bearden, who was a US Army veteran, made use of the GI Bill of Rights, and he traveled to Europe for several months in 1950. He lived in France, where he studied art and philosophy at the Sorbonne and at the Louvre. He met artists such as Pablo Picasso and Constantine Brancusi. He socialized in Parisian circles of American expatriate artists, writers, and performers, including the cultural critic Albert Murray, who became a lifelong collaborator and a close friend. Upon his return to the US, Bearden exhibited his earlier work in group shows, namely in more of the Negro artist exhibitions and in more contemporary art survey exhibitions at mainstream institutions such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Simultaneously, he explored the viability of a career as a songwriter of popular music. Although some of his songs brought him recognition and commercial success, he abandoned the musical endeavor and returned to his day job as a New York City social worker in 1952. And here in these covers of sheet music, published sheet music, you'll see that Bearden is listed as part of the songwriting team, and he's here as Romare Bearden. Bearden's earliest non-objective works date to this period of the early 1950s. He made small, intimate, colorful watercolors and paper, which we haven't seen a lot of these. These were followed by medium and large-scale oils on canvas, some of which were enhanced with ink drawing and collage pieces of painted paper or canvas. While Bearden continued to produce abstract paintings in oil in the 1950s, he also made cut paper and mixed media works that featured geometrically rendered acrobats and harlequins, characters that modernists drew from the history of commedia dell'arte. For artists and writers who had witnessed the destruction of two world wars during the 20th century and were living through the Korean War, such performing figures symbolized human frailty, foibles, and resilience. In addition to advancing his mixed media practice, Bearden studied calligraphy in Manhattan's Chinatown, the neighborhood where he and his wife, modern dancer and choreographer Nanette Rowan, moved in 1956. Around this time, he suffered a mental health crisis, and he was briefly hospitalized, and his production and exhibition activity slowed in the immediate aftermath. Bearden's career picked up again in 1960 when he signed on with the new Gallery Michel Laurent in Manhattan inaugurating a relationship with its directors, including Arne Ekstrom, that would last for the rest of Bearden's career. There, he mounted a well-received show of recent abstract paintings. The Museum of Modern Art acquired one of these canvases from the exhibition, The Silent Valley of the Sunrise, and included it in a group show at year's end at MoMA. The following spring, Bearden mounted a second show of abstractions at the Cordier and Ekstrom, then known as Cordier and Warren Gallery, thanks to the investment of Daniel Cordier, who was an early champion of Dada and Surrealism. That Bearden show also garnered flattering reviews that confirmed his position in the interlocking circles of New York School artists. Bearden mounted his third exhibition at Cordier and Ekstrom, as it was then known, in 1964, in October of that year. Entitled Projections, Bearden's show comprised 21 large format and photostatic prints that were the product of a multi-step process. First, he pieced together small figurative assemblages from photographs that he clipped from glossy magazines, and sometimes augmented these clippings with charcoal and ink drawn on them. Then he used a photostat machine to enlarge them into gelatin silver prints roughly the size of posters, sometimes in incomplete editions of 6. Most are printed on white paper, some are printed on colored sheets. A few combine multiple colors in a single enlargement. The photostats marked a dramatic departure in form and content from the 1950s and early 1960s lyrical abstractions for which Bearden was then well regarded and known by. The photostats were his first sustained engagement with representational Black subjects since the 1940s. These photostats of the early 1960s were met with immediate and enthusiastic critical reception. They changed the course of his career. The term photostat covers both the photocopier technology pioneered in the early 20th century and the silver gelatin prints it produces. You can see in this photo that the photostat machine is operated by a trained technician. This photo dates to the 1940s, well before we know about Bearden's photostats, but here it is for informational purposes. The machine consists of a large format camera, a roll of photosensitive paper, and self-contained photo processing elements that can produce high fidelity black and white prints in the desired sizes in a matter of minutes. Although Bearden had previously used photostats to study the old masters, his decision to enlarge his own work in this way was unusual. By 1963, 1964, the technology had been in commercial use for roughly half a century, but had yet to be recognized as a fine art medium or tool. Among its advantages, photostat machines print on rolled paper instead of on pre-cut sheets, so the print sizes are limited only by the roll's width. The primary disadvantage is expense, because photostats can only produce negative prints, that is to say, a light figure on a dark ground. A positive print, that's a dark figure on a lighter ground, requires a second pass through the machine. In the Bearden Catalogue Raisonné, you'll see that his handpiece objects are called collages, just as Bearden himself called them. Collage is a medium with roots in the Cubist era of the early 20th century, papier collé. In other publications, you might see that collages comprised of photographs, like the projection sources, are traditionally called photomontage, a medium whose family tree includes German Dada, Russian constructivism, and Surrealism, practices that have traveled to other cities outside of those countries of Germany and Russia, and certainly practices that are associated with political dissent. These two formats, the unique photomontage and the photostat made after it, offer dramatically different viewing experiences of the same image, same composition. On the left, Bearden's small original collage draws us in. It is first assembled on a typing paper-sized support. With the composition, Bearden then leads our eyes to color and texture, elements that his hands bring together. On the right, he has given us the photostat's smooth surfaces and grayscale tonalities. It's crisper and larger, and to me, it's like a stilled or frozen moving image or something of film or TV, albeit in black and white. As Sarah Kennel wrote in the National Gallery's 2002 exhibition Catalogue, many of Bearden's photostats recast canonical themes in Western art, genre scenes, devotional imagery, history paintings, portraits with Black figures. The result merges references to contemporary Black life, African art, African sculpture in particular, and Black folk traditions in ways that simultaneously redress an enduring representational lacuna in art history. Bearden's works index the richness and diversity of Black cultures and experiences and refute the myth of a unitary Black subject. More than half of Bearden's photostats depict scenes of everyday life, that is, genre scenes, a theme favored by old master artists in Europe that Bearden studied, and by his Black artist contemporaries, artists such as Jacob Lawrence, Archibald Motley, and Horace Pippin, among others. And these were artists that Bearden exhibited with in the 1930s and 40s. Bearden explained what this was about at the time when he identified himself as, quote, an artist who shares a dual culture that is unwilling to deny the Harlem where I grew up or the Harlem of the Dutch masters that contributed its elements to my understanding of art. As a product of the Great Migration, Bearden was particularly sensitive to nuances of rural and urban lifestyles. His titles often pin down narratives for scenes that might otherwise appear timeless. For example, Evening 910 461 Lenox Avenue situates this group of friends in Harlem, relaxing after hours with a friendly card game. Bearden's photostats exhibited under the heading The Prevalence of Ritual reflect his interest in relocating canonical treatments of biblical subjects in the US South. The Prevalence of Ritual's tidings reads as an adaptation of the previous representations of the New Testament Annunciation story, in which the angel Gabriel informs Mary of her pregnancy. By contrast, the Prevalence of Ritual, a conjure woman as an angel, takes license with the subject of angelic visitation by switching Mary for an unidentified nude bather, akin to Rembrandt's depictions of Old Testament Bathsheba character, a figure more associated with sin rather than of sanctity. In 1963, Bearden convened friends and fellow artists to discuss hiring a bus to go down to represent Negro artists, that was his phrase, at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedoms on August 28th of that year. Although the artist's plan to rent a bus did not pan out, the fellowship that they created did not dissipate. Soon, a multi-generational group of 14 or so of these New York Black artists took the name Spiral, a group that flourished from 1963 to 1966. Spiral proved absolutely instrumental to his development. Bearden came to Spiral, of course, as a successful abstract painter. He proposed a solution, though, to the idea of the double bind of expectations. Should the painter choose to work representationally and figuratively, or are they allowed to, and will people accept their interest in non-objective work? Bearden suggested to the group that they work together collaboratively, using representational photo montages gathered from the clippings that he himself had gathered. He said at the time, I quote here, I worked on one or two alone of these photo montages just to get the idea myself to show the other artist. But they didn't seem to be too interested in it, so I continued. In that summer of 1964, Bearden produced most of the photostats in the Cordier and Ekstrom show of October of that year. Although information has yet to surface to differentiate them from the initial 4 or 5 that he worked on, we do know that there was critical and enthusiastic reception of this work. And it prompted the Corcoran Art Gallery in Washington, D.C., to host an iteration of the exhibition, which opened in October 1965 and included 22 photostats alongside 5 of Bearden's photo montages. So, what we take away from this is, of course, projection sits at the intersection of a few converging ideas about the relationship of art and politics in the 1960s that reach back to the effervescence of assemblage in the previous decade and up through the ongoing civil rights struggle in the 1960s. Here we can think about that according to conventional wisdom, all of the New York School painters in the 1950s, whether Black like Bearden or white artists, Asian American artists, artists who were women, etc., were all enthralled to the idea of pure abstraction. The conventional wisdom would suggest that they forswore references to politics, to pop culture, to history, literature, anything that tied their work to the real world. While this truism may be true for some of these artists, including Bearden in his abstract paintings and collages in the 1950s, the decade also saw a powerful alternative in the use of worldly materials. That is to say, found texts, found pictures, and found objects, things that really direct the viewer's attention to life here and now. In the UK, we have the example of Richard Hamilton's 1956 collage. And this is also happening, of course, in other parts of the world where this strategy is being thought of as pop art as well. We have in the US Andy Warhol's large format photo silkscreen paintings, representing here one of the most famous examples of Warhol's work in this vein. The series erroneously, or as Anne thought of it, ironically titled Race Riots, is particularly relevant. In fact, these paintings reproduce photographs of police attacking nonviolent civil rights demonstrators in Birmingham, Alabama, which the photographer Charles Moore made on May 10th of 1963, and then Life magazine published in its issue that came out the following week. That Warhol was already working on paintings that summer indicates the degree to which Black liberation struggles was something that he supported and that was pervading even the coolest and seemingly distanced corners of the New York art world. An even broader expression of that support were benefit exhibitions and sales to support the civil rights efforts. Bearden said in interviews of that time that he took pains, though, to distance photostats from activist art. He said, "I create social images within the work as far as the human condition is social. I create racial identities so far as the subjects are Negro. But I have not created protest images because the world within the collage, if it is to be authentic, retains the rights to speak for itself." Still, so many of Bearden's proponents read the projections as a hybrid of documentary photography and social critique. For example, the New York Times reviewer Stuart Preston set the tone with an early review that lauded projections, quote, as degrees of actuality that straightforward images could never achieve. Preston called the work a knockout kind of work of its kind, propagandist in its best sense. By 1967, Bearden had revised his positions on politics and the projections and his work. In 1967, quote, he said, "My image in projections was definitely a protest image, more so than I had imagined when I was doing it. end of quote. Presumably, that shift was related to new directions in his work, which Cordier and Ekstrom Gallery exhibited that year as new collages. The projections certainly situated Black figures in compositions inspired by canonical themes in African and European art. However, by 1967, Bearden was distancing himself from that earlier project. Most importantly, he permanently retired the photostat as a medium to focus entirely on large format, two-dimensional original assemblages that exploit his considerable gifts as a colorist by interpolating colored photographs and papers, sometimes with drawn and or painted additions. While Bearden explained the decision as a financial one, he could demand a higher price for a unique object as opposed to a print. The implications were broader. The new collages, shown in the 1967 Cordier and Ekstrom Gallery show, had larger scales, larger dimensions, larger size, and it meant that the visitors seeing the work could register the work's handpiece construction from across the room. They could see that they were made by a human hand. Likewise, in works such as this one shown in 1967, the composition suggests textured lushness. The large passages of colored paper simplify figure-ground relationships and thus streamline Bearden's archetypal narratives. His titles eliminate cues to specific cities or times, and they sort of universalize the themes that he starts to explore in these late 1960s works. Bearden's Cordier and Ekstrom show of 1967 sold out quickly, and the hallmarks of Bearden's new collages, the color, the size, the scale, the strategic use of found imagery, the evidence of the artist's hand, the orientation to suggest that these were universal themes, set the standard for Bearden's career over the remaining 2 decades of his life. As the 1960s drew to a close, Bearden retired from his social work career. He matched his rising profile as an art maker with mounting visibility across the cultural landscape. His mid-career retrospective, Romare Bearden, Paintings and Projections, was organized by the Art Gallery at the State University of New York at Albany, and it included an important catalog essay by his friend, the award-winning novelist Ralph Ellison. Arguably, even more effective in broadening his work's reach were his regular contributions to group shows, including the multi-venue surveys such as the one titled Social Comment in America, organized by the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and 30 Contemporary Black Artists, a show organized by the Minneapolis Institute of Arts. Both of these were organized in 1968. Bearden complemented his success as an exhibiting artist in the 1960s by reviving his publication practice that were parts of his formative years in the 1930s and 1940s. That's part seen in his aforementioned high-profile magazine cover commissions for Time, for Fortune, for the New York Times Magazine. But he's also doing critical writing. Whereas his previous text, titled The Negro Artist and Modern Art, published in 1934, and The Negro Artist's Dilemma, published in 1946, while these texts had centered on social and cultural conditions for Black US artists in those decades, the 1930s and 1940s, his new publications highlighted formalist concerns with a universal, if somewhat traditional, orientation. He collaborated on the book called The Painter's Mind with his friend, artist Carl Holty, a title we see here that indicates, like the article title, that's the first page of an article by Bearden on the right, published in 1969. What we see in these titles of the book and the article is a reinforcement of Bearden's identification with the medium of painting, something that people, like I've said from the beginning, and what Anne and I write about in our essay, by the 1960s, the end of the decade, late 1960s, people are thinking of him as a collage artist, but he's using that word, painting. Outside of the studio, Bearden also built on his leadership roles in Spiral, as we've talked about, 1963 to 1966. He was a leader of the Harlem Cultural Council, founded in 1964, and he was a curator of the path-breaking survey exhibition called The Evolution of Afro-American Artists, a span of 1800 to 1950, which he organized with the curator Carol Green in 1967. And with these projects, he sought to bolster Black artists, both historical and contemporary, in various curatorial and institutional venues. Bearden also was vocal in his criticism of the exclusion of Black artists from the Whitney Museum of American Art survey in 1968, the survey called The 30s Painting and Sculpture in America. He also was among the protesters outside the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Harlem on My Mind exhibition in 1969. That exhibition, which again, something many of you might have read about and maybe even remember, was distinguished by reproductions of photographic images, photojournalism, and some photography by the photographer James Vandersea, but there were no painters and sculptors, original work in Harlem on My Mind. Bearden was among the co-founders of the now venerable Studio Museum of Harlem in 1968 and of the Cinque Gallery, which is no longer extant, in 1969. The Cinque Gallery was a nonprofit Greenwich Village space that presented the works of artists of color for more than 3 decades. So what I'm pointing out here is that Bearden is also saying, if we won't be seen, if we won't be exhibited by these mainstream white-led institutions, we'll make our own work, we'll make our own spaces. Perhaps the clearest index of Bearden's stature at the close of the 1960s was his role as the moderator of the Black Artists in America, a symposium, which the Metropolitan Museum of Art organized in the late 1968. And you can see the sort of oscillation. He's inside the museum, he's outside the museum. The panelists were artists who were historical artists, artists of Bearden's decade, Bearden's era, such as Jacob Lawrence, and there were contemporary artists as well, such as Tom Lloyd and William T. Williams. The fact that Bearden was chosen as a moderator and he skillfully managed the debate in the actual symposium, and you're seeing the transcript of the symposium as it was published in the Met's bulletin in January 1969, really spoke about his leadership in the field, his leadership in the cultural realm. In that symposium, and as it's presented in the transcript, and this is where I'll be wrapping up, Bearden offers a poignant observation about the centrality of Black cultural production in the US that speaks to his own creative project's contribution. He writes and said in the symposium, "They say that abstract expressionism, action painting, is the first indigenous American art exported and imitated by artists all around the world. No critic that I have ever read has ever aligned this spark with jazz music. But that's the feeling you get from it: involvement, personality, improvisation, rhythm, color. What I'm trying to point out is that Black culture is involved far more into the whole fabric of American life than we realize." Thank you, everybody. Appreciate your time. And now we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Jackie, for giving us this sort of in-depth look into Bearden and this moment when he pivots and becomes known for collage, which is something that he has been remembered for. I invite you participants again to place your questions that you might have for Jackie Francis in the Q&A section. And let me just first ask one question, which is, Jackie, how did you discover Bearden? How did you come to him?
Bearden was always there. Maybe he discovered me. Um, if you're a student of art produced in the United States in the 1930s and 1940s, you're going to come across Bearden's work. You're going to come across it because he's an artist working in New York City. And for those people especially interested in the move from what seems to be the dominant approaches of social realism in the 1930s to more figuratively abstract work in the 1940s, Bearden's work in those gouaches, those watercolors, which I showed you some of the religious themes, like He is Arisen. He also interprets Federico Garcia Lorca's poems, and he meets Lorca. He and Holty meet Lorca in New York in that period. He meets Miro. I think that Bearden comes up. And so he comes up also as somebody who's an activist, right? He's part of the Harlem Artists Guild. He's writing about artists' rights and support for artists during the Depression. Some of his cartoons articulate that. And I mentioned Michael LaBelle's article on that and many, many others. So Bearden is there. You don't even have to pay that much attention. He comes up. He comes
Yeah,
up.
yeah, yeah. We do have a comment in the Q&A from our colleague at the Romare Bearden Foundation, Deirdre Harris Kelly. She is wanting to share with the audience that two of Bearden's projection series works are on view at the Museum of Modern Art here in New York City as part of an exhibition of their permanent collection. They have several Beardens. So room 416 is dedicated to Bearden. You can see his works, Other Mysteries and Train Whistle Blues #1, which were both created by the photostat process. And you can see the painting that was mentioned early in the talk, Silent Valley of the Sunrise. So if you're curious to see the works for yourself, some of them are currently on display at the Museum of Modern Art. And she thanks you for a wonderful talk. So
And see
yeah,
I don't know if Ringo's Die is up there, but
yeah.
at the Modern right now. But that kind
And
of
his
conversation,
contemporary Jack
his
Whitten.
his Jack Whitten. I mean, there is a conversation in every exhibition, but here's an opportunity following this talk to really say, what's happening in this conversation?
Yeah, yeah. So let me ask you a little bit about Bearden's writing. He talks about, as you were wrapping up, where you were saying, Bearden was sort of everywhere, and he was writing about the challenges that Black artists were facing and their sort of potential dilemma in terms of what they should choose to represent in their art. Can you discuss his writing a little bit more? And can you say, perhaps, does what Bearden said then still hold true for artists today?
Okay, that's a lot of questions right there.
Yeah.
Some of you might know that Bearden also wrote histories of Black artist productions, Six Black Masters, a thin book. What's the date on that, Kamara? Like 1970s? Can't remember.
That might have been 68.
Okay, should have mentioned it.
Yeah.
And then he does the sort of survey text with his friend Harry Henderson, a history of Afro-American artists. And, it's interesting, Bearden doesn't talk so much about his own career in that second survey exhibition, But in the endnotes to that volume, he talks about the essays that he wrote when he said he was kind of a young, angry young man in the 1930s. So I mentioned a work he did in an essay in 1934, where he's saying, what is it that is being exhibited by my Black American colleagues in exhibitions, including those by the philanthropic organization, the Farman Foundation? Is it something that is really representative of what we know as Black artists who are growing up in the United States? Or is it something that we think should be um, a certain kind of representation that is maybe too reliant on certain kinds of academic and maybe in some minds, essentializing tropes? And he critiques, not by name, one of his contemporaries. We can talk about it later. Uh, um, so, Bearden is saying, as all artists are asking themselves then and now, what is it that I want to communicate as my idea? Because that's what art is. It's a represented idea, whether it's conceptual art, whether it's abstract sculpture, whether it is um, photography that's experimental or video. It's an idea that is being presented to us. Later, as I said, he says, well, I was kind of maybe harsh in the 1930s and 1940s. But what he still sticks to is this idea that you've got to work authentically. You've got to work in ways that even when the reception might not be full heartedly and full voicedly in support of your work with bravery and courage to do something that is true, that is energetic, and that is honest. He uses the word authentic even, and I don't think he means that essentially. He just means do what you know, right?
Mm.
And what he's trying to say is Black artists in his generation, Hale Woodruff, Jacob Lawrence, his cousin by marriage, Charles Alston, that we know a lot. We've studied a lot. We studied Western art, we've studied African art. Woodruff was looking at indigenous American art, right? So take all of those things as it appeals to you and use it in whatever way you like. Um, I'm going on just one more second because your
Yeah.
question was triple cheered about, this is something Anne really sinks her teeth into the essay, this idea of art and politics, as if, I think Anne would agree with me, and if she's on the webinar now, please, pipe in the Q&A and tell me if I've gotten this wrong, but politics is always there, even if it's non-objective art. It's there because of the title of the work. It's there because you are moving away, you think, maybe from representation, but abstraction is always abstract of something.
Mhm.
And it's also there because of where the art is appearing, who's seeing it, who's writing about it. So we might think politics isn't there, but it's kind of like saying, "Oh, I don't vote, so I'm not political." Not voting is political.
Yeah.
So non-objectivity is a political statement.
Yeah.
That's true now. It's true then, and I would venture to say it will always be true.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So then this is a question from the audience. Can you give us just some names of contemporary Black artists
Oof.
that work in collage? Maybe like Bearden, maybe a little differently, just to identify some names that people can look to out there in the world.
There are so many, and of course, give me a second. I'll
Okay.
start to think that through because my mind has been all Bearden.
Yeah.
The other part of the jump drive, just I took that out and put the
Right.
Bearden jump drive in. But there's so many, and I'll start to jot them down while I
Okay.
think about the other questions.
Okay. The question is what advice would you give to students who are new to Bearden? So this is still with a Bearden hat on. What should they look at in terms of Bearden? Maybe before you get to other artists, what could we look at for him?
As is the case with all artists, I think it's fine and it's a good idea to always look at survey text. So you can look at survey text like 20th century American modernism. You can look at a survey text called African American art, first published by Oxford, with Sharon Patton as the author, and then a more recent edition published by Lisa Farrington. You can look at surveys like Brandon Joseph's Collage, right? So look at those things, but also then look at the monographs. So you can pick up from your local public library, or you can purchase exhibition catalogs that are monographic. Like I mentioned, Sharon Patton and Mary Schmidt Campbell's Studio Museum of Harlem, Memory and Metaphor. You pick up Ruth Fine's The Art of Romare Bearden. You can pick up his friend Myron Schwartzman's monographic book, not an exhibition catalog, but a sort of very lushly illustrated book by Schwartzman, who was his friend, an NYU professor, called Romare Bearden, His Art and Life. I'm looking to my right because they're stacked up on my desk
Yeah,
as I
Rick
was getting this
Powell's
together.
survey, Black
Rick
Art.
Powell, Rick Powell's Black Art. So if you search Bearden, and the Library of Congress number will be N6537, it'll start B for his family name. You will see an array of things that are Bearden specialized. But why I mentioned the surveys is think about the conversation that people writing survey texts are trying to create around Bearden. What I think you should find interesting is that most of the work will be about his work. Most of the writing will be about his work after the 1960s. And that's because it's the work where it's seen as the most avant garde. But what I've tried to show you today is his earlier work, which was also seen as avant garde, and even the work that people are like, oh, cartoons, why should I care? You should care because you see the breadth of an artist's production.
Yeah.
Not just Bearden, but every artist. For everything you see in a survey text, assume that there are 900 other works by that same artist that you're not going to see because
Right.
the book cannot be 9,000 pages long.
Yeah.
You're just seeing the box set.
A question about that, which is a post-Bearden um, death question, is what is the sort of take on his work now, his appraisal of his work, its visibility, and even how the market has taken to his work?
Oh, you're going to ask me that question? Try to maintain the firewall between academia
Yeah,
and
and
the
yeah.
commercial gallery. Hey, subscribe to those mutual uh, art platforms. I mean, the
Oh,
value of the work,
he's out there.
he's out there, the work, every time an artist shows his work or her work or their work, it adds to the value. So it's important that the modern has a kind of Bearden room showing its permanent collection, right?
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, tell me, I'm trying to think what's at the heart, what's at the heart of the question? Is that Susan Cooks?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sort of
it's
like
all it's all
trends and like what's
it,
happening with him since he
yeah,
died. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
he remains one of the best known 20th century African American artists, American
yeah,
artists,
yeah,
remembered for his work in collage. And I think that still, keeps his reputation pretty prominent.
yeah.
Um,
Three artists I can write: Deborah
yeah.
Roberts, Derek Adams, Titus Kafour.
Okay.
That's good, right? What do you
Yeah.
think? Come on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's where my mind is. Sorry. I know
Okay.
I don't have any excuses. It's not even noon. It's barely noon here in San
Yeah.
Francisco.
There was a question about Spiral that we don't have time to get to. And I just wanted to say that there is writing about spiral that you can look to, Floyd Coleman's essay, and
Courtney Martin,
yeah.
Courtney Martin, our colleague.
So if you're interested in exploring that, there is literature out there for you. Um, yeah,
WPI, one stop. Go to
yeah,
WPI with all these questions. Keep them coming. They love them.
yeah. Our catalog resume goes into detail about a lot of these works, so you can see them for yourself. Let me ask everyone to join me in thanking Dr. Francis for her talk this afternoon. Um, I'm sure that you are deeply appreciative of what insight she's had to share with us. Um, if you like, and we encourage you, is to check out the essay by Dr. Francis and Dr. Monahan, which is on the website, and the wealth of other information about Romare Bearden that you can find in the Romare Bearden Catalog Raisonné project at wpi.art. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you for spending this time with us. And I would like to give you one last minute.
Check out the recordings on the WPI website of previous scholars and artists and curators and others who offer a lot about Bearden's life, including Anne Monahan, that they've recorded and put out there as recordings. It's such a rich resource, and we're really grateful to have it.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to bringing you additional webinars in the future. So continue to check us out at wpi.art. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Stay well.